Status.
All right, thank you. Good morning. First thing I wanted to talk about today is how we gather the data. Just real quickly, just to go through, we had some question about how do we get all the data into the report. We start off by posting requirements. That's our first bullet. They're posted online, and we have webinars to remind people what those requirements are. The data, the majority of the discipline data, enters in through the PowerSchool incident module. Basically from an office referral form generally. And then PowerSchool reports then allow people to review that data throughout the year. And we encourage the LEA coordinators, particularly in June, to review those reports because at the end of that month, then the data becomes final. We do transfer that data then to a consultant called TOPS over at NC State, and they help us collect the data, post it to a secured website where it can be reviewed and verified. Adjustments can be made, and then if necessary, then TOPS will create some of the crime tables for us, and then they transfer that data over to me for me to do analysis for the rest of the data. So starting off, our first item is crimes, and so school crimes did increase for the first time in I believe 3 years. And that increase for the high school, for grades 9 through 13, these graphs are at the high school level. That increase was 6.8%. Actually, overall, the increase was only 2.1%, so therefore the K-8, actually we saw reductions in crimes at that level. Here's a map that shows where we have our highest rates and our lowest rates. So the highest crime rates are in red and the lowest ones are in blue. Here we just kind of have them kind of spread out across the state. Seems like we have some better lower rates out down east. This is our list of crimes that the ordering of these crimes are pretty constant from year to year. The order for the first 7 is exactly the same as it was last year, and but we do have increases. And the top 2, for example, went up about 200 each for possession of controlled substance and possession of a weapon.
And just to clarify, these are actual numbers, not
These are-
percentage. I mean, not
rates.
Yeah.
Yes, these are not. These are raw numbers, and these are actually number. Even the maps and the graphs were high school. These numbers are overall. That's important to point out. These are the K through 12 numbers. The next graph is short-term suspensions. And short-term suspensions, we broke a very nice long streak of about 7 years of reductions, and we did have a small increase of short-term suspensions at the high school level. That was 2.7%. So the graph is indicating going up from about 84,000 to around 86,000 in 2014-15. Now, whenever we have increases like that, it's the net result across the state. For example, in this one, we had 63 LEAs that increased their short-term suspensions. We had 50 LEAs that decreased their short-term suspensions. Here is a graph for short-term suspensions, and this is one that shows a clear trend in terms of the geographic locations. You can see the big cluster of higher short-term suspension rates in the east. Right? Very much east to west trends here. Long-term suspensions. We also had an increase in long-term suspensions, but that increase was only in the high school grades. It was 6.6%. The graph is showing it going up from 714 to 761. Overall, for K-12, we had a decrease of 3 long-term suspensions. So that, again, the K-8 long-term suspensions went down.
Can you define short and long term?
Yes, short term is 1 to 10 days, long term is 11 or more days. Here's our map showing the long-term suspensions and where they're located, the highs and the lows, and they're pretty much spread out across the state. Here's our reasons for suspensions, in both short-term and long-term, and I included 2 years in this graph here, or this list. Same order for both years for short-term suspensions. Disruptive behavior, fighting or affray, second. Third, aggressive behavior. Fourth, insubordination. 5, inappropriate language. Long-term suspensions, we had a difference. We had possession of controlled substance as being the leader both years. Other category was the same, and then we had slight differences. We had aggressive behavior third in 13-14, disruptive behavior in 14-15, and so on. You can see slight differences in the 3, 4, and 5 position.
What would be examples of other?
Well, you know, we put that in there so that people that cannot find an appropriate behavior to put down, to include that. They're not comfortable using one of the 90-some behaviors that we have in there, they would just put other.
And have to give no specifics following other?
Not in the data. Now, you know, if you could follow up probably to find out what that was on an individual case, or you could ask the districts to supply more information, because in the incident they're going to have probably a description of what happened. So they will have a record of what happened, but in terms of the classification, they can choose other.
Any other questions?
Yes, ma'am.
Jess?
Do we have information regarding which districts classified these suspensions based on other?
Sure. I mean, we can break it down that way. Yeah, we can do that.
Is there a correlation between the slight increase in incidences and the increase in the number of students? And don't we have an additional 1% more?
Yes,
students?
in the report you'll see we have rates also. We have
No,
rates.
that's
We
why I
haven't done
wanted
it
to
in
point
terms of
that out a
rates.
while ago. That's I'm glad you raised that again. That's why I point that out. Number of incidents is one figure, but then per 1,000 students is another
Yeah.
indicator.
Thank you.
Right.
And that is in the full consolidated report
Yes,
that you
yes, we
provided.
would have the rates for short-term suspensions, long-term suspensions,
Right.
dropouts, and all that.
Mr. Collins?
Is any of this data correlated with the climate studies at the schools?
The
I know
climate,
some of the questions on the climate survey talks about a safe and school environment. It's also discipline questions there. And it would seem that there would be some good information when you correlate the two to determine whether or not teachers perceive the discipline practices as being adequate or not versus the suspensions. The other thing is, it strikes me that you're probably not capturing in-school suspension and alternative school assignments, which would be interesting to see too, and especially correlating them with dropout rates as well. You know, many years ago, legislation limited the amount of time we could suspend students, so therefore that caused a precipitous drop in out-of-school suspensions. It doesn't mean necessarily that the improvements that the advocates of that were hoping are being realized, and the data on how effective schools are with respect to their alternative assignments and how they bring students back into the school, to me, is as important as finding out whether they're pushing people out.
right. We do have data on the alternative assignments and the in-school suspensions in the consolidated data report. We don't have it broken down by district, but we can do that. We can break that down by district. In terms of the correlations to the climate survey, that is something we can look into.
I think that's what I was saying ahead of time is, you know, Ken was very careful when we talked about this. This is just the data. This is just the data. And I think we'd like to schedule a time to come back with those suggestions, which are very good suggestions of how, you know, it's fine, but, you know, if all we're doing is collecting the data and not doing anything with it, then why do we do it because we have to, but still, we'd like to do something with it. And we've talked about, you know, we can speculate on things, but it might be good to bring this back for a discussion. Mr. McDevitt?
And you're right, the analysis of the data is critical, and then the follow-up to the analysis is also critical. Madam Superintendent, I think I read in the report on this that 10th grade, this spike of 10th grade dropouts, and I think all of us could have some ideas about how to approach that. It'd be interesting to see how that correlates to some of these suspensions and activities prior to reaching that 16th birthday, because behavior changes, and I think another overlay that's very unfortunate is that well, I won't say it as a fact, I'd say it as, let's look at it, is as employment increases, seems that dropouts also increase, and we should have some approach to driving that. I think, ad nauseum, you've heard me, I really do believe we've got to find a way to raise that compulsory age in an appropriate way, perhaps phased, but to get it to 17 and then 18.
Madam Superintendent?
We will be glad to come back with that, with the analyses that both of you have indicated, and we also have some other ideas about some correlations that we could do. We need to keep in mind that the high school dropout rate is an annual event, and it means that we have to renew our efforts to bring these students who dropped out or who were counted as dropouts in October back into the school system so that they can graduate. And we have some correlations that we could help see that relationship also.
That's pretty intensive work.
Okay, all right, the next slide is on short-term suspension increases. Just looking at the short-term suspensions in all grades, I just thought it would be interesting to dive down a little bit deeper into those reasons and the changes that have occurred from 13-14 to 14-15, and you can see the changes. Each one of those leading changes did go up quite a bit, although the overall short-term suspensions increased 5.2%. Those 6 leading reasons are 9.9%, and those reasons are very, in most cases, are pretty general labels that don't really have definitions. Disruptive behavior, fighting, aggressive behavior, insubordination, improper language, and disrespect. So in that table, you do see the totals of 208,650 short-term suspensions. That's for all grades. The actual reasons are going to amount to more than 208,000. I think I looked at it, it was 269,000, and that is because you can have more than one reason for each suspension in the data.
And again, these are raw numbers, not taking into account the number of students.
Right, these are raw numbers. Okay, now before I go do the dropout data, just wanted to go through quickly how we collect the dropout data. We also have procedures posted online. The Power School system allows schools to search across the state to try to find any missing students. And of course, they also do their due diligence to try to locate them in other states and see whether or not they're in school. But after the 20th school day, the schools begin assigning the dropout status to students in Power School. There's about a month span in which that is done, and then we collect it, and they are able to view the list of verified dropouts. That period eventually comes to the end sometime in November, and then we pull the data from Power School to analyze it. Here's the graph of dropouts across time, and yes, unfortunately with dropouts we also had that first increase in 7 years, and that increase was that was 4.8%. Now the the numbers of dropouts increased 7.6%. Here's where we get in the difference between count and rate. 7.6% increase in numbers of dropouts. We went from 10,404 to 11,190, but that represented a 4.8% increase in the rate, which went from 2.28 to 2.39. Here are our state map, which shows where we have the high and the low dropouts. And you'll notice that there's some correlation, as there tends to be, with the short-term suspensions. So that is something that I will talk about in just a second. Before I do that, though, let's take a look at the reasons for high school dropouts, the changes from year to year. And this is just total numbers. You can see at the bottom of the slide, you can see the raw numbers and the increase from 10,404 to 11,190. And notice that our top reason, attendance, is actually like 40%. That actually went down as a percentage of the reasons. It went down, but had a raw increase of 133 because the numbers of dropouts increased. Enrollment in community college, unknown, lack of engagement, school, choice of work over school, moved, and academic problems. And then you have to get down to academic problems to see one of the reasons that actually decreased.
Yes,
Jean?
ma'am.
Ms. Willoughby, I'd like for you to explain the enrollment in a community college and the board's policy moving forward that does not affect this.
Okay. Yeah, this will be the last year that we will have to count in the statistics all students that enroll in community college. Starting next year, students that go to the local community college and take the adult high school program will be still reported as dropouts, but in the data, they will be an exemption. And so for those students only, for the districts that choose to do this, and they have to track those students over time, making sure that they maintain continuous enrollment with adult high school. For those districts, we will not count those as dropouts in the numbers for 2015-16.
And currently, this includes the students who have left our public schools to pursue a GED and also the students who pursue an adult high school diploma.
Yes, and yes, currently that's true, and it's true for both of these years that you see up here represented.
So you're saying in the future, that number will go away on our report, is that right?
No, that's not true. It will still be, community college will still be a reason because,
Oh, I see, yeah.
because we'll have students that are GED, and I believe there's actually another community college program as well, that's not adult high school.
But in the subsequent report, we'll have to have greater clarification so that you can see which ones would be pursuing a GED and those which would be pursuing an adult high school diploma or any other option.
Yeah.
What's the metric on academic problems, or how do you determine that? That really is interesting at a time when we're ratcheting up rigor, that academic problems
Yeah.
as a reason would go down significantly.
Yeah, these are not, they're not really defined, and we don't really know, it could be different people in different locations that actually assign these values. They're probably guidance counselors, social workers, people like that determine the values to go here. It's interesting that I did actually, when I asked people to kind of comment on why do you think you got increases, I didn't get a very wide trend, but I did have like 3 different LEAs reported. It had to do with academic rigor. They were saying that as a reason for possibly having more dropouts.
And it's less.
And that says less. Yeah. Statewide. Of course, it was just 3 districts that told me that. Okay, the last thing that I have on in the statistics for at least for dropout and short-term suspensions and crimes, we do a correlation. And so I've got a couple of slides, a couple of different ways of looking at the data combined together. One is to take the districts, like you see up here represented, and just line up all the rates and then run a correlation of those rates against one another. And every year always gotten a correlation between dropout and short-term suspension. This year I also got one between dropout and long-term suspension as well, very high correlations. And of course, the significant thing about that is that suspensions really is a school decision. When you decide to suspend someone, that's the decision that's made. Short-term is generally made at the school level, long-term at the district level. And there is a correlation, has been for a number of years, with dropout. Just another way to look at it is to take the quartiles and kind of lie them against each other. So I start with the dropout quartiles, and that's the purple line, and take those same quartiles and compute the averages for the other statistics, crimes, short-term suspensions, long-term suspensions, and I scale them so they all fall on the same graph by adjusting what the rate is. And you can see that visually, you can see how the short-term suspension line lines up with the dropout line. And then also you can see that reason why that long-term suspension rate also, it's not quite as, doesn't line up quite as good, but it still goes up as dropout goes up. So, and of course we did get statistical correlation with those as well. Okay, the last slide I have is just our uses of corporal punishment, which is thankfully is on the downward trend. Again, it did go up a little bit, went from 122 to 147, so it's really kind of hard to see on this graph because we've had such a drastic decrease across the years. We did go down from 5 LEAs using it to only 4 LEAs using it, but we did have a slight increase.
And that information is more detailed in the consolidated report, but just as a reminder, this board about 3 years ago did pass a resolution suggesting that school systems no longer use corporal punishment, and I think it's down to, you said 4 districts that still use it. Any other questions about this report? Mr. Ford?
Yes, so I'm gonna go ahead and address the elephant in the room a little bit here. And I'm looking at the more detailed report. And whereas I know this is the first year in a while that overall rates and numbers of suspensions have went up, been on a consistent downward trend, what I can't seem to figure out is why are we still experiencing such racialized gaps in the long-term and short-term suspensions? Even as we are trending down, we haven't closed those gaps. Why do you think that is?
You know, I think it's like Ms. Willoughby said, I'm kind of charged with collecting the data.
Yeah.
And yeah, I could only speculate about that. I really don't know.
Is there anything we can do to peer a little, because I know it's not in the slide deck, but to me that's an issue.
Well, it is an issue, and I think we see local districts addressing some of those questions, exactly what you just brought up. And I think I think what we need to do is make a list of all the things we see as concerns from the data so that we can come back and address those. You know, I said to Ken, so why this and why this? And he said, you know, I collect the numbers, and for a fuller discussion, I think we do need to come back and look at that issue as well as the one that Mr. Collins raised and others. Madam Superintendent.
Well, there are several places where I think we need to look. And one is when we look at the number of first-year teachers we have in our schools, when we look at the inexperienced teachers, and that means that those teachers, they need extra help and assistance to deal with cultural diversity, to be able to use better classroom management, discipline, positive discipline. And so I think an answer is our work with the multi-tiered system of support. Another has to deal with professional development for our teachers to raise the awareness. And the third is to recognize the differences in cultures and to recognize that what may be considered as disrespect in one culture is not disrespect in another culture. And so we have to make our teachers aware of those differences. And I do believe that it is time that we renew our commitment to have professional development modules that can be a part of home base, that can help assist local school districts. Because we need to close that gap, and it's in the best interest of economic development in our state, and it's in the best interest of each child.
Well said. And I think it's, there are a lot of things that we can raise, and I hope as you have time to delve into the full report, you will look at those things that concern you. Mr. Chair, perhaps we can bring this back for a fuller discussion when we're not speculating, but really getting to the core of some of these issues.
Well,
Anything else, Dr. Gaddis?
And that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
okay,